Welcome to Lesson 9A.4 on the comparative and superlative forms in Spanish. The first comparative form we're going to discuss is comparatives of inequality when dealing with adjectives. We use these type of comparisons when comparing two people or two objects and stating that one is better or worse than the other. The adjective that we're using to create this comparison has to agree with the initial subject, so the first object or the first person presented in the actual comparison. The structure is going to look somewhat like this. Object A is, so you'll have a verb, más or menos, adjective, that's your comparison, que, and then you'll have your second object or your second person. So let's look at this in context. I'm going to compare Mario and Raúl, and I'm going to compare them in terms of athleticism. Mario es más atlético que Raúl. So atlético is masculine singular, not because of Raúl, but rather because of Mario. Estos niños son más cómicos que esos. Cómicos is masculine plural because of estos niños. Esta casa es más grande que aquella. Well, grande is an adjective that only has singular or plural forms, and because casa is singular, I chose grande. Las obras de Picasso son menos realistas que las obras de Rembrandt. I am comparing not Picasso and Rembrandt, but I am comparing the works of Picasso and the works of Rembrandt. That is feminine, plural. Realistas only has singular and plural forms, so I have to elect the plural. Now, every comparative of inequality will have más or menos in front of it. Certain adjectives can't function in that structure. In Spanish, it is not allowed to say más bueno, más malo, más viejo, or más joven. The same exists in English. We do not say more good, more bad, more old, or more young. We have to turn those into other statements, and Spanish does the same thing. If you're getting ready to write más bueno, you need to say mejor instead. Mejor replaces the two words más bueno. If you want to say más malo, instead say peor. Más viejo, mayor. Más joven, menor. So let's compare two classes, history and English. La clase de historia es mejor que la clase de inglés. I really want to say más buena, but I can't, so I just substitute those two words for the word mejor. Jaime and Sarah. I'm going to compare their age. Jaime es menor que Sara. Instead of saying más joven, I replace those two words with menor. Now there's another structure of comparatives, still of inequality, and that deals with verbs. And basically what's happening here is that someone or something does an action better or worse than someone else, or more or less than someone else. In this case, it's the verb we're focusing in on, and the verb must conjugate to the original subject. We still have our más or menos. We can have an adjective to highlight how the action is done, but in most cases it's verb, más menos, and then our que. And the verb is what we focus in on. So let's look at some examples. Carmen habla más que Antonio. I'm talking about which one talks more. Well, Carmen does. She does this action more than Antonio. Habla is conjugated for Carmen, not for Antonio. Yo estudio más que mis hermanos. I'm comparing myself with my siblings in terms of studying. Well, I do that action more so than they do. So estudio is conjugated for yo, because I am the subject. Mi papá duerme más que mi mamá. I'm comparing mom and dad in terms of who sleeps more. Well, dad does. And because dad's the original subject, duerme conjugates to dad. Now, I mentioned earlier that when dealing with comparatives of inequality, and specifically verbs, you can highlight how the action is done by including an adjective. They play worse than I do. It's still comparing the action of playing, but I'm adding in an adjective there to just modify and snazz it up a bit. So now I still have to look at my verb and conjugate it to the original subject, which is ellos, so I have juegan. But I wanted to say they play more poorly or more bad, and más malo we know is not acceptable, so I say peor instead. La profesora de español enseña mejor que los otros profesores. I'm talking about teaching, but I wanted to quantify or describe the type of teaching as more good. It's still comparing the action, so enseña is conjugated for profesora de español, but I can't say más bueno, so I have to say mejor. The last type of comparative is actually called a superlative. And you may have heard of senior superlatives, and this is where you single somebody out as being the best. Same thing in Spanish. A superlative, you're singling somebody out as being the best or the worst out of a group. The structure is very similar to a comparative of adjectives, where you have más menos, an adjective, but there are a few other components that change. The first thing is instead of más menos adjective que, the que switches to a de, because that's going to be introducing the group. You're looking at this whole group and naming one person as the best, the worst. The other thing that will change in the structure is that you must have a definite article in front of the más menos. And this has to agree with the original subject, because you are literally saying the most intelligent, the least creative. So you're putting in the word the. And the word the is an article, and it has to match the original subject. So you have two things that your original subject influences. It influences your article choice and the correct modification of your adjective, what form your adjective is going to take. So let's look at some examples. Iván va a ser el más exitoso de nuestra clase. My grouping is I am looking at our class, and I'm picking one person to be the most successful, and that's Iván. Iván influences my choice of el, and Iván influences my choice of exitoso. I have to make it masculine singular. Ana y Nico son los mejores de la clase. So again, I'm looking at a class collectively, and I'm picking out the best. Well, it happens to be two people, Anna and Nico. Anna's a girl, Nico's a boy, but masculine dominates when choosing gender and number. So I have to choose los for the masculine plural form. Now, I really wanted to say that they were the more good, but I can't say más buenos, so I had to change it to mejor. Notice that mejor does have a plural form, mejores. It doesn't have feminine and it doesn't have masculine plural. It is mejor, mejores, period. Victoria es la más talentosa del grupo. Well, now out of the team, del equipo, out of the team, I am singling Victoria out as the most talented. Victoria is a girl, so I choose la. And I choose talentosa as the correct form of my adjective, so that both pieces match up with Victoria. Miguel es el más creativo de los artistas. So I'm looking at a group of artists, and I'm picking out one person as the most creative. That happens to be Miguel. Because Miguel is masculine singular, so is el, and so is creativo. Now it's your turn to show me what you've learned. See you in class.